What ended up happening is the taxpayer had a primary residence, and this primary residence, he lived in it for several years. He'd been living in it for like 7-8 years, something like that. He basically wanted to sell the property, but he wanted to be as advantageous as possible. He bought the home for around $300,000, and it had appreciated to about $500,000. So he's sitting on about $200,000 of capital gains. However, the Section 121 exclusion allows married taxpayers to sell their property and exclude $500,000 of capital gains. So one of the things that we did was whenever they turned it into a rental property, we actually had him run a cost seg, and this cost seg drove up a really large passive loss. He couldn't use that passive loss in the year that he accrued it, but he did drive up a large loss. Now you may be thinking, whenever you sell a property, you have to recapture that depreciation recapture. However, that $500,000 exclusion applies to depreciation recapture. So if you remember, he was only sitting on about $200,000 worth of gains. So we had a little bit of wiggle room, and we decided to run a cost seg. So whenever he sold the property and he had to recapture all of that depreciation, he had some wiggle room. So the entire depreciation was still underneath that threshold, that $500,000. Now that cost seg produced a large passive loss. And even though it was a suspended passive loss, whenever he sold that property, whenever you sell properties in general, your suspended passive losses get released. So he was able to exclude the full capital gain and depreciation recapture whenever he sold his property using the 121 exclusion. And that cost seg produced a pretty large passive loss. And whenever he sold his property, those passive losses got released. And first they offset any remaining capital gain. All of his capital gain was already used, so then it turns into non-passive losses and offset some of his W-2 income. The long story short, what happened is that he was sitting on about $200,000 worth of gains. After the cost seg, it was about $95,000, which got bonus depreciated. He had to recapture that. So his total capital gain was really sitting at around $300,000 around there. So which was well under the $500,000 exclusion. He then had a suspended passive loss, which was sitting at around about the $95,000 mark around there. It was somewhere around there. But that $95,000 got released whenever he sold the property and was able to offset his W-2 income.